You know what's worse than being scammed for money? Being scammed for hope. At least when someone takes your cash, you know exactly what you lost. But when someone takes your belief that you could actually be loved again at 49, when they make you think you finally found your person in a place where you thought you'd just be another lonely expat, that's the kind of theft that follows you home. I'm sitting here in my empty condo in Fredericton, staring at WhatsApp messages that will never be answered, wondering how a 24-year-old nurse from Tagwig made me feel more alive in 3 months than I had in 5 years, and then vanished like she never existed at all. Like we never existed. If our stories resonate with you, don't forget to like, comment, and tell us where you're watching from. This story was shared with us by one of our longtime viewers. He asked us not to share his name, but he wanted his experience heard. I should probably start by telling you about myself. My name is Nathan. I'm 49 years old, and I run an online business coaching practice from Fredericton, New Brunswick. After my divorce finalized 18 months ago, I decided to take what my ex-wife called a midlife crisis trip through Southeast Asia. She wasn't entirely wrong. I'd been married for 15 years to a woman who stopped looking at me like I mattered somewhere around year 12. The divorce papers cited irreconcilable differences, but the real reason was simpler. We'd become roommates who split mortgage payments and barely spoke during dinner. When she moved out, taking half of everything including the dog, I realized I had no idea who I was anymore without someone else's expectations defining my days. So I sold the house, liquidated some investments, and bought a one-way ticket to Bangkok, with 6 months of freedom stretching ahead of me. I told myself it was about finding perspective, maybe writing a book. Definitely not about meeting women. That last part was a lie I believed for exactly 3 weeks. By the time I reached Manila in early March, I'd been traveling for 4 months. Thailand had been beautiful but tourist-heavy. Vietnam was incredible, but I felt like an observer, never really connecting with anyone beyond transactional conversations with taxi drivers and restaurant servers. Cambodia broke my heart in ways I wasn't prepared for, and Myanmar left me feeling small and insignificant against all that history and struggle. I arrived in the Philippines carrying a backpack full of souvenirs I'd never display and a phone full of photos that looked exactly like every other Western traveler's photos. I was lonely in a way that had nothing to do with being alone and everything to do with feeling invisible. I rented a studio apartment in Bonifacio Global City because it felt familiar, like a sanitized version of home where I could pretend I belonged somewhere. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd traveled halfway around the world to hide in a place that looked like downtown Calgary. That's when I downloaded the dating app. I'm not proud of it, but I'm being honest here. I told myself it was just to meet people, maybe find someone to show me around Manila who wasn't getting paid to smile at tourists. The truth was, I missed feeling wanted. I missed the possibility that someone might light up when they saw my name on their phone. My ex-wife had stopped doing that years before we divorced, and the silence in my life had become so complete that I'd started talking to myself just to hear a human voice that cared about my thoughts. So I created a profile, used a photo from my hiking trip to Banff the previous summer where I looked tan and almost confident, and started swiping through faces of women who were universally too young, too beautiful, and too far outside my league to take seriously. I matched with dozens of them, had conversations that went nowhere, got asked for money or gifts within the first few messages, and generally confirmed everything cynical I'd ever heard about Western men and Filipino dating apps. I was about to delete the whole thing when her profile appeared. Isabelle Santos, 24 years old, a nurse at St. Luke's Medical Center in Taguig. Her photos weren't professionally shot like the others. They were candid, natural. One showed her in hospital scrubs looking exhausted but smiling. Another was her hiking somewhere green and mountainous, hair pulled back, no makeup, genuinely happy. Her bio was simple: night shift nurse who loves books, hiking, and finding good coffee shops, looking for genuine conversations with genuine people. Something about the word genuine used twice made me pause. I almost didn't swipe right because she was so obviously out of my league, but something in her expression seemed kind, Not performatively kind like the other profiles, but actually kind. Like she might listen if you had something real to say. I swiped right expecting nothing and forgot about it until my phone buzzed 3 hours later with a message that would change everything. Hi Nathan, I saw you're from Canada. I've always wanted to visit there. What's the most beautiful place you've been? That's how it started. Not with, hello handsome or hi daddy like the others. Not with questions about my job or hints about financial problems. Just curiosity about a place she'd never seen, asked by someone who seemed genuinely interested in my answer. I spent 20 minutes crafting a response about Algonquin Park in autumn, the way the maple leaves create a canopy of fire above the lakes, how quiet it gets when you paddle beyond the reach of car engines and cell towers. I sent it expecting her to respond with something generic, but an hour later I got 3 paragraphs about growing up near the mountains in Bataan, how she'd learned to swim in the Bataan Peninsula's hidden waterfalls, and how she dreamed of seeing snow that wasn't on television. We talked for 6 hours that first night. 6 hours. When's the last time you talked to someone for 6 hours about everything and nothing? When's the last time you lost track of time because another person was that interesting? She told me about working the night shift in the cardiac unit, about holding the hands of old men who were dying alone because COVID restrictions meant their families couldn't visit. She told me about her nursing school professors who still treated female students like they were playing dress-up, about the long commute from her family's house in Bataan to the hospital in Manila, about saving money for her younger sister's college tuition. I told her about my business, about helping other divorced men rebuild their confidence and find new purposes. I told her about the loneliness of working from home, about how success felt empty when you had no one to share it with, about coming to the Philippines not really knowing what I was looking for but knowing I hadn't found it yet. Somewhere around 2 a.m. Manila time, 1 p.m. my time in Fredericton, she said something that stopped me cold. You sound like someone who's been hurt, but isn't bitter about it. That's rare. I stared at that message for 10 minutes before responding because no one had ever described me that way. But she was right. I had been hurt. My ex-wife's indifference had hurt more than any fight ever could have, but I wasn't bitter. I was just waiting. Maybe we could meet for coffee tomorrow. I typed, then deleted, then typed again, then spent another 5 minutes wondering if I was being too forward. But she beat me to it. I have tomorrow night off. There's a coffee shop in BGC I like. Want to meet there around 7? Just like that. No games, no manipulation, no requests for money to pay for her taxi. Just a simple invitation to meet another human being for coffee. I said yes before I could overthink it, and we exchanged numbers. Real phone numbers, not just the app. That night I lay in bed in my BGC studio, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember the last time I'd felt excited about meeting someone new. I couldn't remember. Even in the early days with my ex-wife, everything had felt careful, calculated, like we were both auditioning for roles we weren't sure we wanted. This felt different. This felt like possibility. The next morning I woke up to a good morning message from Isabelle. Not, good morning handsome, or good morning baby, like the other women I'd matched with. Just, good morning Nathan. Hope you slept well. I'm excited to meet you tonight. Simple. Genuine. Using my actual name. I realized I'd been holding my breath since I read her profile, waiting for the moment she'd reveal herself to be like all the others. But this message felt real. I spent the day walking around Manila, killing time, trying not to check my phone every 5 minutes for messages from her. She sent me 2 more throughout the day. One was a photo of her lunch with the caption, "Hospital cafeteria food. Don't be jealous." The other was a link to an article about Canadian healthcare with the message, "Thought you might find this interesting. We should compare notes tonight." She was thinking about me during her day. She was thinking about topics we might discuss. When's the last time someone did that for you? When's the last time someone cared enough about a conversation you were going to have to actually prepare for it? By 6:30 p.m., I was sitting in the coffee shop she'd suggested, checking my appearance in my phone's camera, trying not to look like exactly what I was. A 49-year-old divorced man who hadn't been on a real date in 2 years and had no idea what he was doing. The place was small, cozy, filled with young professionals and college students. I felt ancient and obvious. Like everyone could tell, I was a lonely expat, waiting for a woman half his age to show up and validate his existence. But when Isabelle walked through the door at exactly 7 p.m., all of that anxiety disappeared. She was more beautiful in person than in her photos, but what struck me wasn't her beauty. It was her presence. She moved through the coffee shop like she belonged there, like she belonged everywhere. She spotted me immediately, smiled genuinely, and walked over with the kind of confidence I'd forgotten existed. "Nathan," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Isabelle. It's so nice to finally meet you." Her handshake was firm, professional, like she was meeting a colleague, not a date. It put me at ease immediately. "The pleasure is entirely mine," I said, standing to pull out her chair. She laughed. "Thank you, but I can handle my own chair. What I can't handle is choosing what to order. What's good here?" And just like that, we were talking. Not performing, not interviewing each other, not trying to impress, just talking. She ordered a cappuccino and a slice of oob cake. I got a black coffee, and we split the cake. She told me about her shift the night before, about an elderly patient who'd coded twice but refused to give up, about the satisfaction of being part of someone's fight to live. I told her about a client I was coaching through a career transition, about how rewarding it was to watch someone discover they were capable of more than they'd believed. We talked for 3 hours. 3 hours passed like 30 minutes. She asked thoughtful questions about my business, about what it was like to work with people who'd lost their direction. She told me about nursing school, about the moment she'd decided she wanted to work in cardiac care, about the responsibility of literally holding someone's life in your hands. We talked about travel, about books, about the differences between Canadian and Filipino approaches to healthcare. She was smart, not just educated, but genuinely intelligent, curious, engaged. She listened when I talked and responded with insight, not just politeness. And when she talked, I found myself leaning forward, genuinely interested in her thoughts, her experiences, her perspective on everything from nursing ethics to the best hiking trails in the Philippines. When the coffee shop started closing around 10 p.m., neither of us wanted to leave. "Would you like to walk around BGC for a bit?" she asked. "I don't get to explore this area much. Usually I'm just passing through on my way to work." We walked for another hour, past the late-night restaurants and bars, through the parks and plazas. She knew things about Manila I'd never learned in my weeks there, pointed out buildings and landmarks, told me stories about the city's history and development. But she also asked questions about me, about Canada, about what it was like to live somewhere cold and quiet after growing up somewhere warm and loud. At some point during our walk, she took my hand. Not in a romantic way, exactly, but in a comfortable way, like we were old friends who'd done this many times before. It felt natural. It felt right. When we reached my building around 11 p.m., she turned to face me. "I had a really nice time tonight, Nathan. You're different from what I expected." "Different? How?" I asked. She thought for a moment. "Kinder. More interested in actually getting to know me. Less." She paused, looking for the right word. Less transactional. The word hung between us, and I knew exactly what she meant. I'd seen the other Western men in Manila, the ones who treated every interaction with local women like a business negotiation. I'd sworn I wasn't one of them, but until that moment I hadn't realized how rare that actually was. "I'd like to see you again," she said simply. "I'd like that very much," I replied. She kissed my cheek, a gentle, friendly kiss that somehow meant more than any passionate embrace I could remember. "Text me when you get upstairs, so I know you made it safely," she said. And I realized she was taking care of me the same way I'd been wanting to take care of her. It was a small thing, but it mattered. I watched her get into a taxi, waited until it disappeared into Manila traffic, then went upstairs and immediately texted her. "Made it safely. Thank you for such a wonderful evening. You're pretty amazing." Her response came quickly. "You're pretty amazing yourself. Sleep well, Nathan." I did sleep well, better than I had in months. For the first time since arriving in the Philippines, I woke up excited about the day ahead, excited about the possibility of seeing her again. We texted throughout the next day, nothing intense or overwhelming, just small updates about our days, shared observations about Manila, gentle flirtation that felt natural and unforced. She was working that night, a 12-hour shift in the cardiac unit, but she still took time to send me photos of the sunrise from the hospital break room, of her terrible hospital lunch, of a street cat she'd befriended during her dinner break. Each message felt like a small gift, a reminder that someone was thinking about me while living their own full, interesting life. 2 days later, we had our second date. This time, she suggested we meet at a restaurant in Makati, somewhere she said served the best adobo in Manila. I arrived first again, but this time I wasn't nervous. I was excited. When she walked in, wearing a simple sundress and sandals, looking relaxed and happy, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, genuine anticipation for the evening ahead. Not anxiety about performing correctly or saying the right things, but actual excitement about spending time with someone whose company I enjoyed. She ordered for both of us, explaining each dish as it arrived, teaching me the proper way to eat with my hands when appropriate, laughing when I inevitably made a mess of things. The food was incredible, but more importantly, the conversation was even better than our first date. We talked about everything: her family, my divorce, her dreams of traveling, my fears about getting older, her relationship with her faith, my struggles with purpose after the business success I'd achieved felt empty. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said over dessert. "Of course. Why did your marriage end? You don't have to answer if it's too private." I thought about deflecting, giving her the sanitized version I usually shared. Instead, I told her the truth. We stopped seeing each other. Not literally. We lived in the same house for years after we stopped connecting, but we stopped seeing each other as people worth knowing. I became just a provider to her. She became just a manager to me. We went through the motions of marriage without any of the joy or partnership. By the end, we were polite strangers who shared a mortgage. She nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds lonelier than being alone." "It was," I said. "Much lonelier." "Is that why you came to the Philippines?" "To stop feeling lonely." I considered her question seriously. "Partly. But mostly I came because I realized I had no idea who I was when I wasn't trying to be what someone else needed me to be. I thought maybe if I got far enough away from my old life, I might figure out who I actually am." "And have you figured out who you are?" she asked. I looked at her across the table, this beautiful, intelligent, kind woman who seemed genuinely interested in my answer, and realized something had shifted. "I'm starting to," I said. "Being here, meeting you, it's helping me remember things about myself I'd forgotten. Like how much I enjoy really talking to someone, how good it feels to be curious about another person's life, how much I'd missed feeling hopeful." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm glad," she said simply. "You deserve to feel hopeful." That night, when she kissed me goodbye, it wasn't on the cheek. It was soft, brief, but unmistakably romantic. "I'll text you tomorrow," she said. "I'd like that," I replied, and meant it more than I'd meant anything in years. Over the next month, we fell into a pattern. We saw each other twice a week, sometimes 3 times when her schedule allowed. Sometimes we'd meet for dinner, sometimes for coffee, once for an afternoon at the National Museum where she taught me about Filipino art and history with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely loved her country's culture. She never asked me for money. She never hinted at financial problems. She never suggested expensive restaurants or activities. If anything, she was almost stubborn about paying her own way, insisting we split bills or take turns paying despite my protests that I was happy to cover our dates. "I work hard for my money," she said one evening when I tried to pay for dinner again. "I like spending it on things that make me happy. Spending time with you makes me happy." How do you argue with something like that? How do you not fall for someone who sees dating you as something worth investing her own resources in? The turning point came 3 weeks into whatever we were building together. I'd been staying in a short-term rental, but the lease was ending, and I needed to find something more permanent. Isabelle offered to help me apartment hunt, said she knew the city better than I did, and could help me avoid getting overcharged by landlords who saw Western tenants as walking ATMs. We spent a Saturday looking at places, and by the afternoon we'd found a small but nice apartment in Tagwig, closer to her hospital, in a building with decent security and a pool. "This one feels right," she said, standing in the empty living room. "You could be happy here." I signed the lease that day, partly because the apartment was perfect, but mostly because she'd said I could be happy there, and I trusted her judgment about my happiness more than I trusted my own. That evening, she came over to help me unpack the few belongings I'd accumulated. She'd brought groceries and offered to cook dinner in my new kitchen. I watched her move around the space, putting dishes away, setting up the coffee maker, arranging the small orchid she'd bought as a housewarming gift. She looked like she belonged there. More than that, I felt like I belonged there when she was there. We cooked adobo together, her guiding my hands as I learned to balance the soy sauce and vinegar, laughing when I added too much pepper and we had to start over. We ate dinner sitting on the floor of my empty living room, using boxes as a table, drinking wine from coffee mugs because I hadn't bought proper glasses yet. It was one of the most romantic evenings of my life, and we hadn't even kissed yet beyond those brief goodnight kisses. After dinner, we sat on my small balcony, looking out over the lights of Taguig. She was quiet, thoughtful, and I could tell something was on her mind. "Nathan," she said finally, "can I tell you something? Anything. I haven't dated anyone in over a year. After my last relationship ended, I decided I was done with men who only saw me as a prize to win or a problem to solve. I was planning to focus on work, on saving money, on my family. I wasn't looking for anything when I matched with you." She paused, looking out at the city lights. "But you make me want to try again. You make me feel like maybe there are men who want to know me, not just own me." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just took her hand. "I feel the same way," I said finally. "I came here thinking I was too old, too damaged, too set in my ways to start over with someone new. You make me feel like maybe I was wrong." That night, she stayed over. Not for sex, though the chemistry between us was undeniable. She stayed because it felt natural, because neither of us wanted the evening to end, because we'd found something rare, and neither of us wanted to let go of it too quickly. We lay in my bed, fully clothed, talking until almost dawn. She told me about her family, about her father who worked construction, and her mother who cleaned houses to pay for Isabelle's nursing school. She told me about her younger sister who wanted to be a teacher, about her dreams of eventually working in pediatric nursing, about the house she wanted to buy for her parents someday. I told her about my business, about the satisfaction of helping people rebuild their lives, about my fears of growing old alone, about the possibility of selling everything in Canada and staying in the Philippines if I found a reason to. "What kind of reason?" she asked, her head on my chest, her voice sleepy. "The right person," I said. "Someone worth changing my whole life for." She was quiet for so long I thought she'd fallen asleep. Then she said, "That's a big risk." "The biggest," I agreed, "but maybe some things are worth the risk." When I woke up the next morning, she was already awake, sitting by the window with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise. "Good morning," she said, smiling. "I made coffee. I hope that's okay." "More than okay," I said, joining her by the window. We drank coffee in comfortable silence, watching Tagwig wake up below us. It felt domestic, natural, like we'd been doing this for years instead of weeks. "I should probably get home," she said eventually. "I work tonight, and I need to spend some time with my family." "Of course," I said, though I didn't want her to leave. "Can I see you Thursday? I'm off Thursday evening." "I'd love that," I said. She kissed me goodbye at the door. A real kiss this time, soft but passionate, full of promise. "Thank you for last night," she said. "Thank you for staying," I replied. After she left, I sat in my apartment, surrounded by boxes I still needed to unpack, and realized I was happier than I'd been in years. Maybe happier than I'd ever been. The next few weeks were the best of my life. Isabelle and I fell into an easy rhythm, seeing each other whenever her schedule allowed, texting throughout the days when we couldn't be together. She introduced me to her friends from nursing school, brought me along to birthday parties and group dinners where I was welcomed warmly, despite being obviously the oldest person there by 20 years. Her friends were kind, intelligent, funny, and they treated me like Isabelle's boyfriend, not like an oddity or a walking bank account. "You're different from what we expected," one of them told me during a night out in Poblacion. "Different? How?" I asked. "Isabelle told us you were sweet and genuine, but we thought maybe she was just being nice. Western men who date Filipino women." She trailed off diplomatically. "I know," I said. "I've seen those men. I hope I'm not one of them." "You're not," she said firmly. "You can tell because Isabelle is happy. Really happy. We haven't seen her like this in a long time." Isabelle was happy. I could see it in the way she smiled when she saw me, in the way she took my hand without thinking about it, in the way she made plans that included me weeks in advance. She started leaving small things at my apartment: a toothbrush, a change of clothes, a book she was reading. I loved finding these traces of her in my space, loved the way they made my apartment feel like a home instead of just a place I was staying. We developed inside jokes, shared routines, small traditions that were ours alone. Sunday mornings, she'd bring pastries from a bakery near her house, and we'd eat breakfast on my balcony while she told me about her week at the hospital. Tuesday evenings, when she worked day shifts, I'd pick her up after work, and we'd find a new restaurant to try, rating each place's adobo against her mother's recipe. Nothing ever measured up, but the search was half the fun. 1 month into living in my new apartment, 6 weeks into whatever we were calling our relationship, Isabelle brought up the topic I'd been both hoping for and dreading. We were lying in bed after making love for the first time, a gentle, passionate encounter that felt like the natural progression of everything we'd been building together. She was tracing patterns on my chest with her finger, quiet and thoughtful. I'd been dreading this question because I didn't have a good answer. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I can extend it, maybe apply for a different type of visa. I've been thinking about it a lot lately." "And after that?" she asked. "I mean, long term. What's your plan?" I turned to face her. "Honestly, my plan is changing. When I came here, I thought I'd travel for 6 months, maybe write a book, then go back to Canada and figure out what came next. But now," I paused, trying to find the right words. "Now I'm thinking maybe what comes next is here. With you." She was quiet for a long time, and I started to worry I'd said too much too soon. Then she smiled, a soft, genuine smile that made my chest tight with emotion. "I've been thinking about that too," she said. "About what it would be like if you stayed. About whether this thing between us is real enough to build something on." "What do you think?" I asked. "I think it's real," she said. "I think what we have is different from anything I've experienced before. But I also think it's complicated. The age difference, the cultural differences, the fact that you'd be giving up your whole life in Canada for someone you've known for 2 months." She was right. Of course. It was complicated. It was crazy. It was probably the biggest risk I'd ever considered taking, but lying there with her, feeling more content and hopeful than I had in years, it didn't feel crazy. It felt like the first sensible decision I'd made in a long time. "What if we took it slow?" I said. "What if I extended my visa, Stayed for another 6 months, and we see how things develop. No pressure, no promises, just seeing where this goes. She nodded. I'd like that, she said. I'd like that a lot. We made love again that night. Slower this time. More tender. Like we were sealing a promise. The next morning, she made coffee while I called the immigration office to ask about visa extensions. Everything felt possible. Everything felt right. I should have known it was too good to last. I should have recognized the signs when they started appearing. But I was so happy, so caught up in the feeling of being loved and wanted after years of feeling invisible, that I missed every red flag until it was too late. The first sign something was changing came 3 weeks later. Isabelle started responding to my messages more slowly, claiming she was busy with work. When we did see each other, she seemed distracted, checking her phone more frequently, not fully present in our conversations. I chalked it up to stress. She'd mentioned that the hospital was short-staffed, that she was picking up extra shifts, that her board exams were coming up, and she was feeling pressure to pass on the first try. When I asked if there was anything I could do to help, she assured me everything was fine. She just needed to focus on work for a while. I believed her because I wanted to believe her, because the alternative was too painful to consider. Our dates became less frequent. Where we'd been seeing each other 3 times a week, it dropped to twice, then once. She started cancelling last minute, always with reasonable excuses: mandatory overtime, family obligations, exhaustion from pulling double shifts. I understood. I'd never dated a nurse before, never been with someone whose work demanded so much physical and emotional energy. I tried to be supportive, to give her space, to not add pressure to her already stressful life. But privately, I was starting to feel anxious. The easy intimacy we'd built was becoming strained. Our conversations felt forced. Our physical connection less natural. She still said she loved me, still kissed me goodbye, still made plans for the future. But something fundamental had shifted, and I couldn't put my finger on what it was. The second sign was social media. Isabelle had never been very active on Instagram, but I'd started following her account early in our relationship, and she'd followed me back. For weeks, her posts had been simple. Photos of hospital sunrises, meals with friends, the occasional selfie. But suddenly, she was posting more frequently, and the content was different. Photos of nights out with friends I'd never met, at bars and restaurants she'd never mentioned, stories showing her at parties and events she hadn't told me about. When I casually asked about one of these outings, mentioning that it looked like fun, she became defensive. "I'm allowed to have a social life without you, Nathan," she said, her tone sharper than I'd ever heard it. "I didn't say you weren't," I replied. "I just wondered why you didn't mention you were going out." "Because I don't have to report my every movement to you," she said. "We're not married." The word married hung between us like an accusation. We talked about the future, about the possibility of me staying in the Philippines long term, but we'd never discussed marriage specifically. I'd assumed it was implied in our conversations about building something together, but maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe she'd never seen our relationship as heading in that direction. Maybe I'd been reading more into her words and actions than was actually there. I apologized for what I called my insecurity, told her she was absolutely right to maintain her independence, promised I'd be more careful not to overstep boundaries I hadn't realized existed. She softened then, kissed my cheek, told me she loved me, and was just stressed about work. But the damage was done. A seed of doubt had been planted, and it grew a little every time she posted a photo from somewhere I hadn't known she was going. The third sign was physical. Our sex life, which had been passionate and frequent, became sporadic and mechanical. She still came to my apartment, still spent nights with me, but she seemed distracted even during our most intimate moments. She'd check her phone immediately after we made love, claiming she was waiting for important messages from work. She started leaving earlier in the mornings, saying she needed to get home to help her mother with something or catch up on studying. The long, lazy Sunday mornings we'd enjoyed became rushed affairs where she seemed eager to be anywhere but in bed with me. When I tried to talk to her about it, she said she was just tired. That work was demanding, that she hoped I could be patient while she got through this stressful period. I said of course I could be patient. I said I understood, but inside, I was starting to panic. By the time we'd been together for 3 months, I was walking on eggshells around her, constantly analyzing her moods, trying to figure out what I'd done wrong, or how I could fix whatever was breaking between us. Our conversations became careful, polite, superficial. She stopped asking about my business, stopped sharing details about her work, stopped making plans beyond the immediate future. When I brought up my visa extension, she nodded absently and said that was nice, but didn't engage with the topic the way she had before. When I mentioned wanting to meet her family, something we'd discussed early in our relationship, she said maybe later, when things were less busy. Everything was always later, when things were less busy, when work calmed down, when she wasn't so stressed. But things never calmed down. If anything, she seemed to get busier and more distant with each passing week. I started to wonder if there was someone else. The thought made me sick, but I couldn't shake it. Her phone habits had changed. She used to answer my calls immediately, respond to texts within minutes. Now my calls often went to voicemail. My messages got responses hours later with brief, polite replies that felt like she was checking items off a to-do list. She'd started positioning her phone face down when we were together, something she'd never done before. When it buzzed, she'd glance at it quickly and ignore it, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she had to force herself not to reach for it. "Important work stuff?" I'd ask, trying to keep my tone light. "Always is," she'd reply. But she wouldn't elaborate the way she used to, wouldn't share the details of her day the way she had when we first started dating. The fourth sign was the lies. Small ones at first, inconsistencies I might have missed if I hadn't been paying such close attention to every word she said. She'd tell me she was working a double shift, then post an Instagram story from a restaurant during what should have been her work hours. She'd say she couldn't see me because she was studying for her boards, then I'd see photos of her at a beach resort with friends. When I asked about these discrepancies, she'd get angry, accuse me of stalking her social media, say I was being controlling and paranoid. "If you don't trust me, why are we even together?" she asked during one particularly difficult conversation. It was a fair question, and the fact that I couldn't answer it honestly should have told me everything I needed to know. But I was so afraid of losing her that I apologized instead of pressing for the truth. I promised to trust her more, to give her more space, to stop questioning her explanations. In trying to save our relationship, I enabled its destruction. The final sign was the night I tried to surprise her at the hospital. It was her birthday, and despite everything that had been wrong between us, I wanted to do something special. She'd been working a lot of night shifts, or so she'd told me, and I thought it would be romantic to show up with flowers and her favorite pastries during her dinner break. I'd planned to take her somewhere nice after her shift, maybe back to the restaurant where we'd had our second date, somewhere we could reconnect and remember why we'd fallen for each other in the first place. I felt nervous but hopeful as I approached St. Luke's Medical Center around 9 p.m., carrying a bouquet of white roses and a box of ensaimada from her favorite bakery. I'd even worn the shirt she'd complimented me on during our first date, hoping it might bring back some of the magic from those early days. The security guard at the front desk looked at me with confusion when I asked which floor Isabelle Santos worked on. "Santos?" he said, checking his computer. "What department?" "Cardiac unit," I said. "She's been working here for about 2 years. He typed for a moment, then shook his head. "I don't see any Isabelle Santos in cardiac. Are you sure about the name?" My stomach dropped. "Could you check all departments?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Maybe she transferred recently." He typed again, more slowly this time, checking multiple screens. "Sir, there's no Isabelle Santos employed at this hospital. Are you sure you have the right facility?" I stood there holding flowers and pastries, feeling like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. "Could you check former employees?" I asked desperately. "Maybe she quit recently?" The guard looked at me with something approaching pity. "Sir, I can't access former employee records, but I've been working here for 5 years. I know most of the nurses, especially in cardiac. I've never heard of an Isabelle Santos." I thanked him and walked outside on shaking legs, my mind racing through possibilities. Maybe she worked at a different St. Luke's location. Maybe she'd lied about which hospital to protect her privacy. Maybe there was a simple explanation that would make me laugh about this misunderstanding later. But deep down, I already knew the truth. I already knew, but I wasn't ready to accept it yet. I called her immediately, my hands trembling as I dialed. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice tired. "Nathan, what's wrong? You sound upset." "I'm at St. Luke's," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I wanted to surprise you for your birthday, but the security guard says you don't work here. There must be some mistake." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "Isabelle?" I said. "Are you there?" When she finally spoke, her voice was different, smaller. "Nathan, I can explain." "Then explain," I said. "Please." "Because I'm standing outside a hospital where apparently you've never worked, holding birthday gifts for someone who I'm starting to think I don't know at all." She started crying then, soft sobs that made my chest ache despite everything. "I do work there," she said. "I mean, I did work there. I quit 3 months ago, right after we started dating." "Why?" I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. "I was going to tell you," she said. I didn't know how. You were so proud of me for being a nurse, for having my life together. I didn't want you to think less of me." "Think less of you? For what?" I asked. "Isabelle, just tell me the truth. All of it." "I got fired," she said quietly. "Not for anything bad. Just budget cuts. They let go of a lot of newer nurses. I've been looking for work ever since, but nothing's available. All those nights I said I was working, I was actually at job interviews, or at home with my family, or just, I don't know, trying to figure out how to tell you I wasn't the person you thought I was." Relief flooded through me so intensely I had to sit down on a nearby bench. She hadn't been cheating. She hadn't been scamming me. She'd just been ashamed, embarrassed about losing her job, afraid I'd lose interest if I knew she was unemployed. It was foolish, but it was human. It was the kind of mistake people make when they're scared of losing something precious. "Isabelle," I said, "why didn't you just tell me? Do you think I care about your job more than I care about you?" "You should," she said. "You should care. You're successful. You have your life figured out. I'm 24 years old, and I can't even keep a job. What do I have to offer someone like you?" "Everything," I said without hesitation. "You have everything to offer. Your kindness, your intelligence, your warmth. Those things don't disappear because you lost a job." "You're not angry?" she asked, and I could hear the disbelief in her voice. "I'm not angry," I said. "I'm hurt that you didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth, but I'm not angry. We can figure this out together. I can help you find another job, or support you while you look, or whatever you need. The important thing is that we're honest with each other from now on." She was quiet for a long moment. "Where are you now?" I asked. "I'm at home," she said. "With my family." "Can I come see you?" I asked. "I still have your birthday gifts. I'd like to give them to you in person." "Okay," she said. "Yes, I'd like that." "Nathan?" "Yes?" "Thank you for understanding. Thank you for not giving up on me." "I love you," I said. "One unemployed phase isn't going to change that." "I love you too," she said, and for the first time in weeks, she sounded like herself again. I took a taxi to her family's address in Bataan, the one she'd given me months earlier when we'd first started dating seriously. The drive took almost 2 hours, but I didn't mind. I was actually excited to see her family again, to have a chance to reassure them that Isabelle's employment status didn't matter to me, that I was committed to her regardless of her career situation. I imagined her mother making coffee, her father asking about my business, her younger sister teasing us about when we were getting married. I imagined Isabelle and me laughing about this misunderstanding, about how silly she'd been to think I'd care about her job more than her happiness. By the time the taxi pulled up to the address she'd given me, I was feeling optimistic about our future again. We'd had our first real crisis as a couple, and we'd worked through it. We were stronger now, more honest. Everything was going to be fine. But when I knocked on the door of the house at the address Isabelle had given me, a stranger answered. An elderly man who looked at me with confusion when I asked for the Santos family. "Santos?" he said. "No, Santos family lives here. We've been in this house for 10 years. I showed him a photo of Isabelle on my phone. "This is Isabelle Santos. She said her family lived at this address." He studied the photo carefully, then shook his head. "I've never seen this girl before. Are you sure you have the right address?" I checked the address again, showed him the number. It was correct. But there was no Santos family, no Isabelle, no trace of the people I'd met months earlier at what I'd thought was her cousin's birthday party. I stood on the street outside the wrong house, feeling like I was losing my mind. Maybe I'd remembered the address incorrectly. Maybe she'd moved and forgotten to give me the new address. Maybe there was still a rational explanation for all of this. I called her again, but this time the call went straight to voicemail. I tried texting, "I'm at the address you gave me, but the family here says they don't know you. Can you call me? I'm confused." The message showed as delivered, but she didn't respond. I tried calling again an hour later. The number was no longer in service. I tried WhatsApp, Facebook, Messenger, Instagram. Blocked on everything. In the span of a few hours, Isabelle Santos had vanished from my life as completely as if she'd never existed at all. I took a taxi back to Manila in a daze, trying to make sense of what had happened. The woman I'd been in love with for 3 months, the woman I'd been planning a future with, had apparently lied about everything. Her job, her address, probably her name. But why? What had been the point? I hadn't given her money, hadn't paid her bills, hadn't bought her expensive gifts. If she'd been scamming me, it was the most inefficient scam in history. Unless the scam hadn't been financial. Unless the point had been something else entirely. But what? And why disappear so suddenly, so completely, without even a goodbye or an explanation? Back in my apartment, I sat on the bed where we'd made love just days earlier, where she'd told me she loved me, where we'd talked about me extending my visa so we could build a life together. I looked through our text messages, searching for clues I'd missed, signs that she'd been planning this disappearance. But there was nothing. Even her last messages to me had been affectionate, normal, consistent with the person I thought I knew. "Good morning, handsome." She'd texted just 2 days ago. "Hope you have a wonderful day. Can't wait to see you tonight." She'd cancelled that night, claiming a work emergency, but the message itself showed no sign that she was planning to vanish from my life forever. I spent the next 3 days trying to reach her through every possible channel. I contacted her nursing school friends, the ones who'd welcomed me so warmly at group dinners and parties. None of them responded to my messages. I tried reaching her through mutual acquaintances, but it was as if everyone who'd known her had simultaneously decided I no longer existed. I even went back to the coffee shop where we'd had our first date, hoping against hope that she might show up there, that this was all some terrible misunderstanding we could resolve with a conversation. But she never came. No one came. I was alone with my confusion and growing panic, trying to understand how someone could disappear so completely from the modern world. On the 4th day, I ran into Marcus, an American expat I'd met at a bar in BGC months earlier. He was someone who'd been living in the Philippines for years, someone who knew the expatriate community and the local dating scene better than I did. When I told him what had happened, his expression grew serious. "What did she look like?" he asked. I showed him photos of Isabelle from my phone. He studied them for a long time, then nodded grimly. "I've seen her before," he said. "Not with that name, but I've seen her. She was dating a German guy I know, about 6 months ago. Same story, nursing student, family in the provinces, very sweet and genuine. Then she disappeared on him too. And before that, I think she was with an Australian, maybe a Brit before that." My stomach turned. "You're saying she does this regularly? Dates foreign men and then disappears?" "I'm saying she's very good at what she does," Marcus said, "and what she does isn't necessarily about money." Marcus explained that there was a subset of young Filipino women who targeted Western men not for financial gain, but for experience, for practice, or sometimes as part of elaborate visa application strategies. "They need to prove long-term relationships with foreign nationals," he said. "Or they're learning how to manipulate Western men more effectively for future endeavors. Or sometimes they're just collecting stories, experiences, learning about Western culture and psychology. You probably taught her more about Canadian men than you realize." The words hit me like physical blows. Everything I'd thought was genuine connection had been research. Every intimate conversation had been data collection. Every "I love you" had been practice for the next performance. "But her family," I said weakly. "I met her family. They welcomed me, included me in family events." Marcus shook his head. "Probably friends playing roles. It's not that hard to stage, especially if you're dealing with someone who wants to believe it's real. And you did want to believe it was real, didn't you?" I couldn't deny it. I had wanted to believe it so desperately that I'd ignored red flags, explained away inconsistencies, convinced myself that love could bridge any gap. "The job?" I asked. "The hospital. Probably researched enough to sound convincing, but never actually worked there. These women are smart, Nathan. They do their homework. They know exactly what kind of story will appeal to the kind of man they're targeting." I felt sick. So everything was fake? Every moment, every conversation, every... I couldn't finish the sentence. "I don't know," Marcus said gently. "Maybe she felt something real for you along the way. Maybe that's why she kept it going for 3 months, instead of disappearing after a few weeks like she did with the others. But yeah, the setup was fake. The framework was manipulation. I'm sorry, man. I really am." That night I sat in my apartment, surrounded by traces of a woman who apparently didn't exist. Her toothbrush in my bathroom, her book on my bedside table, the orchid she'd bought as a housewarming gift, now wilting on my kitchen counter. I should have thrown everything away, erased every reminder of her from my space. Instead, I found myself holding the book she'd been reading, a romance novel in Tagalog with notes in the margins in her handwriting. At least her handwriting was real. Her thoughts about fictional characters were real. But everything else, her job, her family, her feelings for me, had been an elaborate performance designed to teach her something about Western men that she could use elsewhere. I thought about our last night together, how mechanical and distant she'd seemed. I'd attributed it to stress, to work pressure, to the normal ebbs and flows of a relationship. But now I wondered if she'd already been mentally preparing to disappear, if she'd been saying goodbye without telling me. Had she felt guilty about what she was planning to do? Had she hesitated, considered telling me the truth, thought about making our relationship real? Or had I been nothing more than a research project from beginning to end, a case study in the psychology of lonely Western men who come to Southeast Asia looking for love and validation? The worst part was that I still loved her. Even knowing what she'd done, even understanding that I'd been manipulated and deceived, I still missed her. I missed her laugh, her insights about nursing and healthcare, her curiosity about Canada, her warmth when she'd curl up against me on Sunday mornings. I missed the feeling of being loved, even if that love had been fake. I missed the hope I'd felt for our future, even though that future had been an illusion. She'd stolen my money, hadn't destroyed my credit, or emptied my bank account. But she'd stolen something more valuable, my belief that I could be loved for who I actually was, not for what I could provide or represent. I extended my visa anyway, told myself I needed more time to process what had happened, to understand what I'd learned about myself and about relationships. But really, I was hoping she'd contact me. I was hoping for an explanation, an apology, maybe even a chance to start over with honesty this time. I checked my phone compulsively, hoping for a message that never came. I walked past places we'd been together, hoping to catch a glimpse of her, hoping for one more conversation that might make sense of everything that had happened between us. But Isabelle Santos had vanished as completely as if she'd been a dream, leaving me alone with my questions and my slowly breaking heart. 2 months later, I was having dinner alone at a restaurant in Makati when I saw her. She was at a corner table with a white man I didn't recognize, laughing at something he'd said, looking radiant and happy. She was wearing a dress I'd never seen before, her hair styled differently, but it was definitely her. My first instinct was to approach their table, to demand an explanation, to finally get the closure I'd been desperate for. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way she was looking at him, with the same warmth and apparent affection she'd once shown me. Maybe it was the realization that confronting her wouldn't change anything, wouldn't undo the deception or restore my trust. Or maybe it was the simple understanding that whatever had happened between us was over, and I needed to let it be over. I paid my bill and left the restaurant without approaching her table. Outside, I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, feeling something shift inside me. The anger I'd been carrying began to transform into something else. Not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of sad acceptance. She'd taught me something valuable, even if she hadn't meant to. She'd taught me that my capacity for love hadn't died with my marriage, that I could still feel passionate and hopeful and vulnerable with another person. She'd reminded me what it felt like to be excited about someone else's thoughts and dreams and daily experiences. The fact that she'd been performing didn't negate the reality of what I'd felt. My emotions had been genuine, even if hers hadn't been. A week later, I booked my flight back to Canada. I'd extended my visa hoping for closure that never came, hoping for answers to questions that didn't really matter anymore. What mattered was that I'd rediscovered parts of myself I'd thought were lost forever. I'd learned that I wasn't too old or too damaged to fall in love again. I'd learned that loneliness had made me vulnerable to deception, but it had also made me open to connection. The trick would be learning to maintain that openness while protecting myself better, learning to trust my instincts instead of ignoring red flags because I wanted something to be true. On my last night in Manila, I sat on my balcony looking out over the lights of Taguig, the same view I'd shared with Isabelle on our first night together in this apartment. I thought about the man I'd been when I arrived in the Philippines. Broken, lost, convinced that the best years of my life were behind me. I thought about the man I was now, hurt but not bitter, disappointed but not defeated, alone but not hopeless. Isabelle had taken something from me, but she'd also given me something. She'd given me back my belief in my own capacity for love, even if she'd done it accidentally, even if it hadn't been her intention. I deleted her photos from my phone on the flight home, but I kept the memories. Not because I wanted to hold on to the pain, but because I wanted to remember what it felt like to believe in love again. Some lessons cost more than others, but that doesn't make them less valuable. I'd paid a high price for the reminder that I was still capable of feeling deeply, of hoping completely, of loving someone enough to imagine changing my whole life for them. But I was grateful for the reminder, even if it had come wrapped in deception and loss. Back in Fredericton, friends asked about my trip, expecting stories about temples and beaches and exotic adventures. I told them about the food, the culture, the beauty of the islands, the kindness of the people I'd met. I didn't tell them about Isabelle. How could I explain that I'd fallen in love with someone who didn't exist? How could I make them understand that even a fake relationship had taught me real things about myself? How could I describe the strange gratitude I felt towards someone who'd broken my heart? Months passed. The sharp pain of betrayal faded into a dull ache, then into something more like melancholy. I started dating again, cautiously, locally, women my own age who had histories I could verify and references I could check. It felt safe but also somehow diminished, like I was protecting myself so carefully that I wasn't really living, I missed the intensity of what I'd felt with Isabelle, even knowing it had been built on lies. I missed the feeling of being completely absorbed in another person's world, completely invested in their happiness, completely hopeful about a shared future. One evening, almost a year after returning from the Philippines, I was scrolling through my laptop, cleaning out old files, when I found a video Isabelle had sent me during our second month together. It was a short clip of her walking through a park in Manila, narrating the scene for me because I'd mentioned wanting to see more of the city through her eyes. "This is my favorite place to walk when I'm stressed," she said in the video, smiling at the camera. "I wanted to share it with you since you can't be here with me right now." I watched the video 3 times, studying her face for signs of deception, listening to her voice for hints of performance. But all I could see was the woman I'd fallen in love with. All I could hear was warmth and affection, and what seemed like genuine fondness. Maybe that was the real lesson Isabelle had taught me, that love doesn't require perfection or even honesty to be transformative. My feelings for her had been real, regardless of whether hers had been genuine. The hope she'd awakened in me had been real, regardless of whether she'd intended to awaken it. The joy I'd felt in her company had been real, regardless of whether she'd felt the same joy. She'd reminded me that I was capable of love, capable of hope, capable of imagining a future different from my past. Those weren't things she could take away from me, even if she'd wanted to. I still think about her sometimes, wonder if she ever thinks about me, wonder if our 3 months together taught her anything about herself the way they'd taught me about myself. I wonder if she's found whatever she was looking for through her relationships with foreign men, if she's achieved the goals that made our deception seem worthwhile to her. I wonder if she ever felt guilty about disappearing without explanation, if she ever considered reaching out to apologize or explain. I wonder if any part of what we shared had been real for her, if she'd ever stopped performing long enough to actually connect with the man she was manipulating. But mostly, I'm grateful. Grateful for the reminder that my heart still worked, that I could still feel deeply and hope completely, and love someone enough to consider changing everything for them. Grateful for the 3 months when I felt more alive and hopeful than I had in years, even if that feeling had been based on an illusion. Grateful for the lesson that vulnerability is risky but necessary. That opening yourself to love means opening yourself to deception, but that the alternative, staying closed and safe and alone, is worse than any heartbreak. I never did write the book I'd planned to write about my travels. Instead, I wrote this story, this confession, this attempt to make sense of what happened to me in Manila. I wrote it for other men who might find themselves in similar situations, men who come to Southeast Asia carrying loneliness and hope in equal measure, men who might mistake performance for love, but who shouldn't let that mistake convince them to stop believing in the possibility of real connection. We're all vulnerable when we're lonely. We're all susceptible to believing what we want to believe. But that vulnerability is also what makes us human, what makes us capable of love, what makes us willing to risk everything for the chance at genuine happiness. Isabelle Santos, whatever her real name was, gave me a gift, even as she broke my heart. She reminded me that I wasn't too old, too damaged, or too set in my ways to fall in love again. She showed me that I still had hope to give, trust to offer, dreams to share. The fact that she didn't deserve those things doesn't make them less valuable. If anything, it makes them more precious. Because I know now how rare they are, how easily they can be lost, how important it is to protect them while still being willing to risk them for the right person. I'm 50 now, still single, still hoping. But I'm not the same broken man who left Fredericton 18 months ago, convinced that the best years of his life were behind him. I'm someone who's learned that love is always a risk, that trust is always a gamble, that hope is always dangerous. But I'm also someone who's learned that those risks are worth taking, that those gambles sometimes pay off, that hope is the only thing that makes any of this bearable. Someday, I'll meet someone real, someone honest, someone who wants to build something genuine with the man I've become. And when that happens, I'll be ready. Not because Isabelle taught me to trust again, but because she taught me that I'm still capable of the kind of love that's worth fighting for, worth protecting, worth believing in despite all evidence to the contrary. That's the story I wanted to share, the confession I needed to make. Not because I'm proud of being deceived, but because I'm proud of having loved completely, of having hoped entirely, of having been willing to change my whole life for someone I thought was worth it. The fact that she wasn't doesn't diminish the value of what I felt. If anything, it proves how much I still have to give to the right person whenever she comes along. And she will come along. I believe that now, not because I'm naive, but because I've learned the difference between hope and desperation, between love and need, between genuine connection and wishful thinking. Isabelle may have been fake, but what she taught me about myself was real. And that's something no one can take away.